no. The only thing that matters is calories in versus calories out. That's the only thing that truly matters. What is going on, IF Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and I'm going to show you why that statement is factually incorrect. A lot of people like to tout what their favorite guru tells them online. They just like to, unfortunately, appeal to authority. That guy looks like he knows what he's doing. That guy looks like he has a degree. So I automatically believe everything that they say without doing the due diligence behind what they're actually saying. So in this video, I'm simply going to give the explanation as to why intermittent fasting burns fat faster than calorie restriction alone. Now let's go ahead and break it down. Alright guys, quickly before we start, this video is brought to you by yours truly, Fledge Fitness and the Fledge Fitness Jump Rope. If you haven't gotten yours yet, what are you waiting for? With an ergonomic design, aluminum handle, and swivel design, you can't go wrong with the Fledge Fitness Jump Rope. You can click on the top right hand corner of this video or down in the description box below. And of course, as always guys, thank you for your support. Now let's go ahead and jump right into the video. Before we dive headfirst into this entire process of explaining the benefits of intermittent fasting, which it becomes a little redundant sometimes, but sometimes you have to make videos just like this so that people see the polarizing differences of doing calorie restriction versus doing something like intermittent fasting, and why anyone would even waste their time doing intermittent fasting. So we're going to talk about the practical elements before the scientific elements, the practical elements that allow people to be successful with intermittent fasting versus just caloric restriction. And the title of this video, just in case it's triggering people, is not that intermittent fasting burns fat faster than caloric restriction. You have to have caloric restriction in tandem with intermittent fasting. Caloric restriction is the primary driver for weight loss. I have never said that that is not the case, and even though other people who talk about intermittent fasting, other channels who talk about like the keto diet or what have you, claim that calories don't matter, calories 100% matter. That is the primary driver for weight loss. You have to be at a caloric deficit for you to even burn anything at all overall at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month. But the benefit of intermittent fasting on the scientific side is calorie partitioning. It focuses what you're burning to being fatty acids, which is the fat tissue, which is the adipose tissue, and even the visceral fat around the organs. It focuses your body to expend energy while primarily focusing on body fat. Just like this chart that I've referenced many times already, created by Kevin D. Hall from the National Institute of Health, you can see there's a point where your body starts to use more body fat than everything else. You can see the carbohydrate and the glucose drops, as well as even muscle. There's a muscle sparing effect that protects muscle, and you're predominantly burning body fat when you're doing intermittent fasting. Now let's go ahead and talk about the practical elements of intermittent fasting that can give an advantage to somebody over simply doing caloric restriction. Now, for the first practical element when it comes to intermittent fasting is that it just makes everything easier to understand, easier to comprehend, and easier to execute. When you know that you're just eating for short periods of time, it takes all of that stress and thought on creating foods over the course of the day to make 6 meals or what have you. It takes all of that out of your mind. You can just focus on maybe 1 or 2 meals or even 3 meals, but compress them together so that you're not thinking about making meals for the majority of the day. It puts you in an easier place to reduce your calories. So it's easier for you to actually reduce calories when there is a restriction, when you have a window that allows you to eat in a short duration. So because of that window that forces you to eat in a short duration, you're more cognizant of how much you're actually eating, and it's harder for you to overeat in that type of scenario, thus making it easier for you to be at a caloric deficit. This is seen almost across the board. Whenever they're looking at intermittent fasting versus eating, and they allow the participants to eat ad libitum, but they want them to either lose weight or maintain weight. The group that is intermittent fasting always tends to eat less and usually eats at a caloric deficit or caloric maintenance, while the other group tends to either eat at a maintenance level or higher. So the intermittent fasting group, just by default, even when told you can eat as much as you want, tends not to overeat versus the groups that are told that they can eat as much as they want. So there is that cognitive awareness there. There's also what I like to call the invisible wall. The invisible wall simply prevents you from doing that extra snacking that would sneak in if you were just normal eating throughout the day. Things like, oh, I'll just have that chip. Oh, do you want this here? Oh, here's a French fry. Here's this. Oh, I'm scooping in some peanut butter for my kids. Let me just lick the spoon when I'm done. It's not a big deal. Oh, let me just grab this here. Oh, honey, you got some popcorn? Let me get some popcorn. Hey, I'll just grab a soda real quick. That ends up happening when there isn't a restriction of eating. The moment you know that you're in this open zone where you cannot eat, you are aware, whoa, if I grab that chip, I'm breaking my fast. If I drink that beer, I'm breaking my fast. If I eat some popcorn, I'm breaking my fast. You're aware that you're in this zone where you shouldn't be snacking all the time. This completely eliminates extra snacking after your eating window has closed and makes you hyper aware of that. So those are some of the practical elements that just caloric restriction doesn't give you, because it's so open-ended, and at any moment you can eat something and not think twice about it and be like, I don't think it's too much. I might be under my calorie range. I think I'm okay. Meanwhile, someone who's doing intermittent fasting, they eat with cognitive awareness, and then they are completely restraining during that dead zone where they can't eat at all. Now let's go into the scientific elements as to why intermittent fasting burns more fat or burns fat faster than calorie restriction alone. That's important, calorie restriction alone, because there is still calorie restriction happening with intermittent fasting. For this, I want to first talk about a study that was done in 2017. This study was done in the Journal of Nutritional Health and Aging by F.B. Aksangar and colleagues. And this looked at 24 months, but it did something very, very unique. It wanted to see if there was anything special about intermittent fasting. So they had female participants, up to 23 female participants in this study. It was just a single arm study, so it wasn't super rigorous, but it did do something that was unique, and it looked at biological markers that indicated certain things were going on, and I'll explain that. They allowed the participants to just do caloric restriction for 11 months, and then on the 12th month, they told them for that entire month, just do intermittent fasting. And what they told them to do was a 15-hour fast, so it was 15 hours of fasting and 9 hours of eating. And they did that for 1 month. And then after that month was over, they told them to go ahead and do another 12 months of caloric restriction. They noticed that there was a linear decrease in weight that was pretty consistent going into that 12th month. Once they hit the 12th month where they had to do intermittent fasting for all 30 days, they noticed that there was a slight decrease in the weight loss. Yes, weight loss was happening, but in terms of the regression formula, how they saw the speed of the weight loss, it started to slow down a little bit, and then they saw that it was consistently going down again with caloric restriction. But keep in mind that the participants were told that they can eat as much as they like during the intermittent fasting period, and they had to do caloric restriction after and before the intermittent fasting period. So there was that caveat. But even though that was the case, they still continued to lose weight, just at a slower pace. But when they checked the urinary acetoacetate levels, it was much, much higher in the intermittent fasting group. And what does this indicate? The urinary acetoacetate levels being higher indicated there was a greater level of lipid catabolism going on during that intermittent fasting period. That means that fat burning was aggressive during the intermittent fasting period. So although they were losing weight, you can lose weight in so many different ways. You can be reducing water, you can be reducing glycogen, you can be reducing muscle. But with intermittent fasting, body fat is the primary target. Your energy expenditure is partitioned to body fat. And yeah, it's a single arm study. It was somewhat observational. That's fine. The rigor isn't there. But there are also meta-analysis studies where they actually compare intermittent fasting with caloric restriction in a head-to-head and look at multiple studies and synthesize the data and see that fat burning is increased with intermittent fasting. There was even a 40-page systematic review that looked at intermittent fasting and determined that weight loss wasn't different from caloric restriction, but body fat burning was more prominent in the intermittent fasting group, which goes in line with calories in versus calories out being important for weight loss, but intermittent fasting being important in partitioning that weight loss to being body fat. One of the percentage breakdowns that were happening inside of that 40-study meta-analysis looked at Dr. Harvey and colleagues that actually measured the weight loss and determined that 79% of the weight reduction during the trial period was predominantly body fat when it came to intermittent fasting. That was not the case when it came to calorie restriction. They also show that the practical length that you need, kind of the cutoff so that you can see these enhanced benefits of body fat burning, is a 16-hour fast. They see it when you do the 16-hour fast. Now, this is because you're in what's called a post-absorptive range. And this is after your body no longer has any more glycogen, insulin is reduced. Please understand that insulin reducing in and of itself is not what drives weight loss or body fat oxidation. Insulin reducing is part of the equation because that is simply a signal that there's no more glucose to move through the bloodstream. But then the brain substitutes that glucose with ketones from the beta hydroxybutyrate that comes from your liver. That part is what makes intermittent fasting uniquely target body fat more aggressively and cause that metabolic switchover versus just caloric restriction, because ketone bodies have to be created using fatty acids, and 70% of the energy requirement will come from those ketone bodies. And that is why we tend to see more body fat burning with intermittent fasting versus just caloric restriction. So I don't want to make this video super long. I could literally make this video an hour, but I'm going to go ahead and end it there. I'm going to put the links to all of the studies that I mentioned down below. I'm also even going to add the meta-analysis and the systematic review because those are very, very important when it comes to understanding studies and methodologies and rigor to see what the science is truly saying. Meta-analysis are super important. Of course, depending on how those individual studies within the meta-analysis were actually performed. Of course, I want to thank my patrons for my Patreon, and I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here.